Welcome to the TufFish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Meredith Stoddard. Meredith, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I am so glad you are here, and I would love for you to start with how did you get into writing?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I think that I've sort of always been a storyteller. I used to make up all kinds of stories and characters and things when I was younger, and so I just started. Eventually, when I had the time, finally started writing them down. But yeah, I think I don't know. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who is a great storyteller, and she loved to tell stories to me and to my brother. And so I just developed that love of storytelling when I was very young.
So, in part of storytelling, now was she passing along like family stories or tips or things like of a like a culture, a background? Because I know you're into Celtic backgrounds, Celtic lore, but or was it more about like just making up a story to use your imagination? Like there once was a prince, or there's
Yeah, no, for her, I think it was mostly about our family and kind of the small town in North Carolina where she lived. She has lived all her life in that town. She still does. And so it was a lot of, telling about the earlier generations of our family and also some of the folks within the town. So she's kind of the memory keeper for a lot of families, really. And it's a small town, so we're related to just about everybody, I think.
I love that though, because that's true, that memory keeping, that's such a beautiful way to put that. But then also storytelling, because that is what she's doing. She is passing along those, but instead of it just saying, well, this is so and so, and this is so and so, it's a fun way to bring that in and it feel like, and then what happened?
Yeah, yeah. When there's a narrative to it, also it sticks with us more. I still remember some of the stories that she told us when I was younger about our family before the war and all kinds of stuff, and that stays with you.
Yeah, it does. I love that so very much. So then how did you decide to turn, or when did you decide to turn this writing as something that you were interested in, the storytelling that you
Mhm.
you enjoyed, into something a little bit more, like permanent, so to speak, by
Yeah.
writing books?
Yeah, I've sort of always wanted to write. I thought about going into journalism when I was younger, and things like that. And I ended up going into corporate training. So I was telling stories. I was just telling stories about why people should buy tax preparation software instead of, the kind of stories that I tell now. So I don't know. I started writing The River Maiden, which is the first book in my series. I started writing it the year my husband and I got married, and then life kind of has a way of pulling you away from things. So we had kids and moved and all kinds of things, and you have to worry about mortgages and bills and things like that. So a lot sort of pulled me away from writing, and then I got laid off in 2008 on election day, I might add.
Oh my.
And so I ended up, kind of my I it was difficult because there's not a ton of companies around where we were living that offered positions like the one that I had. So I was kind of going, well, what am I going to do now? And my husband said, why do you need to go get a job? You can just stay home with the kids and do what you want to do. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, really? you know, and that was when I started kind of picking up that 50 pages that I wrote, 10 years before, and going, oh, what can I do with this? So I started, and then I wrote a couple of short stories for practice, and kind of just built up that creative energy. I
Yeah.
managed to get this novel out. So
Okay, so to your point, there's a duration between the first set of pages you wrote,
mhm.
and picking it back up again and saying, now what? So what was that like, in the sense that, I mean, I encourage people all the time, between whatever you've written, put some distance, whatever that
Yeah.
is, between that and the next time you pick it up, because you're going to catch things, you'll see things, you might appreciate what you've done, or you might do something different, or you might see glaring things you need to go fix. So since you did have a distance between the first and the second, the next time, talk about that, please.
Sure. I think, there were a lot of changes probably eventually, because originally I started with a prologue, and most publishers these days tell you they hate prologues and you should weave it into the book or whatever, which I ended up doing just because it made for a faster beginning. But yeah, I think also there's just more life experience. There's a good 10 or almost 10 years between when I wrote those first 50 pages and when I picked it up again. And it changes your perspective. It changes the way you're looking at things. And when I started writing, I kind of started with that inciting incident. And then I wasn't entirely sure where it was going. Like, I thought it could be a book. I thought it might be a series, but I didn't completely know where it was going. So when I came back to it, I had a better idea of how I could weave in stuff. And I read a lot of material between the beginning and picking it back up that fed into kind of a lot about folklore, a lot about Scottish history, a lot about American history, and just kind of had a lot more information to work with when I picked it back up. And I was much better able to lay out the plot and kind of see where things were going with that much more experience and that much more knowledge. So I think it's a better book because not necessarily because I had that break, but at least because I took the time and did a lot of research.
I like that though. So then to your point about the plot and then questioning if it was one book or if it would be a series, how did you make the determination that you felt that it would become a series? And then how did you know where to end the first book then?
That's a great question. I love series. I love reading series. I like spending that much time with characters. I like getting into a sort of deep dive with particular characters. So that it wasn't a big push for me to decide to do a series, because I thought, okay, this will be good. I like these characters. They've been with me a while now. I think I'm going to keep following them and seeing what they do. But also, I just realized that the story is more kind of a sweeping story, right? And my jumping off point for the series is what would happen if the future part of Once and Future was now. And so that's a pretty broad topic. And and so I felt like there was a lot of room for more stories and more depth to it, and what that would look like, that kind of story in a modern setting. So it wasn't too hard to decide that it was going to be a series. It took a while. I was probably into writing the third book when I decided exactly like what format that series is going to take. So I have a first trilogy, which is sort of getting us to a point where we're accepting that this is what's happening. And then there's a second trilogy that I'm working on now that is sort of getting the ball rolling. And then there's a third trilogy that's going to be kind of about the next generation. So it's a pretty involved series.
Wow. Yes. So, okay. Now a whole lot of things are coming to me. One of which is do you have a system or some recommendations for someone writing something with this kind of reach, this many characters and levels of conflict, timing, characters, relationships? Do you have a system that helps you to keep everything straight and when they're showing up, almost like a spreadsheet even?
Yeah.
In my head.
So after working in the corporate world for almost 15 years, I definitely am a fan of spreadsheets, but so I have kind of a series Bible where the key characters, I have sort of pages on them where I say, okay, this is their middle name, like stuff that you would normally forget, their middle name, what color hair they have. I mean, I don't forget the hair color, but just simple details that are important and, need to be consistent and kind of what their journey is. And then I also am a huge fan of Save the Cat Writes a Novel. It is a great way of just laying that out. So I have a spreadsheet where I have the story beats for each of the books laid out. And I have kind of their theme and a sort of brief synopsis of where we're going with that. And I find that super high level view helps me keep my focus. And each book sort of has a theme, and the theme within each book is sort of the true north. So yeah, I've got my A plot and my B plot, and those things are moving, but what is the big, focus on for this book within this series? So it's good to kind of think from that high level so that I like a tight story. So even though my books are big, I don't like to ramble about, side quests and things like that. I like to kind of keep it relatively tight. So it helps me do that, to be able to see, all of that from a high level and then zoom in where I need to.
So it also sounds like it's a form of that planster, panster, that dance. It sounds like it's straddling the center in that way, because there's the planning at the high level, enough to know, to give structure and to give direction, and like you said, to keep all the moving parts together and aligned, but allowing you the free flow and your characters the free flow to say, but I'm on this journey, Meredith. We're going on this journey. You're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to keep writing. It sounds like they get to talk to, they're talking to you as a part of it too.
Oh yeah, all the time.
So it's a relationship, essentially, that it's not just, it has to follow exactly. It sounds like it's a blend.
Yeah, I kind of call myself a super plotter, because before I start writing, I will take that beat sheet and break it down and plot out every scene. That doesn't mean that I stick to that. I do sometimes have things that, come up and take me in a new direction, and I get plenty of surprises along the way. I know a lot of people who are anti-plotting, who don't like not having surprises, but trust me, I get plenty. But there's always room, and if that happens, I'll kind of stop and replot. And say, okay, so this suddenly happened. This character showed up. What role are they going to play? Because and once in a while, you get that magic character that shows up, and you just love them more than you thought you would, and they have more personality than you thought they would, and you realize that they need a bigger role altogether. So, and that, there's plenty of time to stop and replot and redirect and stuff. So there's lots of room for adjustment as the writing goes on.
So then it sounds to me like the way you go about this is that, to your point with a book having a theme in the bigger picture, but the theme helps you to create the end, like to know what's contained in this story. So it has its own plots and so forth, and conflict and development, but in the same breath, it has an ending. Oh, wait. And a cliffhanger to move into the next book.
Usually.
But something that leads to say, and there's more coming.
Yeah. Yeah, I rarely answer all the questions in one book because it's a series. So there are always, lingering questions and what's the next step and things like that. But I do like to kind of say, okay, I'm going to resolve this theme here in this book, but there's still this overarching plot. And that's one of the reasons why plotting becomes important, because it helps me keep in mind, where the whole series is going as I'm, making those adjustments along the way.
But it also sounds like it would help in the sense that you are making sure you're closing up what you intend, what your characters intend, but then recognizing, hey, we have some other parts that are still left open, and they need to move to a subsequent book, even if it's resolved in book 3 or book 4, it's still, it helps you to make sure that you haven't lost sight of that, because the reader will notice, the reader will like, hey, what happened to this over here? And it's not,
Yes.
and it helps to make sure that when you have so many pieces, a complex project like that, you're able to keep all the parts and remember even the smaller details.
Absolutely. And that is really important, is remembering those smaller details and what's carrying over to the next book, because there's a lot of sort of political intrigue and things happening, and it's kind of a family saga in some sense. So there's a lot of that kind of woven in, and you know, we don't tend to resolve family issues very quickly. So that kind of thing tends to carry on from book to book. And yeah, I mean, and the main character, Sarah, she's got a lot of baggage. You know, she had a lot of childhood trauma and things like that. So it's, you know, that's not the kind of thing that gets resolved right away. And then a lot of things happen to her during the, you know, course of the series too. So there's a lot to process.
But I like that though, because I mean, that shows growth, that makes it intriguing, that makes a story that you can feel like you're sitting in, kind of I've heard it described like you're feeling like you're in the movie, you're taken in, you're in the movie, and you're part of it, and you're reading with it, but you feel like you're watching a movie versus just kind of feeling a bit more detached from it. I think it sounds like it will, to me, it brings you in more.
Well, that's certainly what I hope. You know, I want folks to feel like they are a part of this. And the response that I get to, especially my two main characters, Dermot and Sarah, is pretty strong. You know, a lot of people really love them. And especially Dermot, he's sort of a book boyfriend for a lot of people. And, you know, and so that kind of richness of character, that kind of realness, I think becomes really important if you're going to keep drawing people on from book to book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So given that your books also have lore in them, Celtic and American, like you said, it sounds, I would think that the plotting is just going to help, one, make sure you are when to weave in those key points or how they're fitting in. So it's almost kind of like its own undercurrent to each book. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes easy because Sarah, the main character, is an ethnomusicologist. She's, you know, she's into folk songs, and she's the sort of starting point for her, at least, is trying to trace a song that her grandmother taught her. And so that gives that sort of feeds into that folklore need. But even beyond that, some of the plot of the whole series is directed by folklore and directed by Arthurian legends. So it's on multiple levels. We're getting, you know, local folklore of where Sarah's from in Appalachia, or where she goes to in Scotland, or what have you. But then we also have the sort of broader folklore that feeds into it. And some of it is also made up, like some of the folklore that's in there that kind of drives Sarah's story, I invented. But because I studied folklore, because I research folklore a lot and read about it a lot, I kind of follow some conventions that are pretty common. So it seems a little bit more believable. So I have an author's note in the back of each book that says, this is the invented part, this is the real part. I don't want anybody confused.
I love that though. I love that so much. So then, but to your point, there's elements of research, just like you said, with that 10-year gap, there was some research also going on in there, and research continuing through that because of what you're reading, what you're seeing. So how do you balance between, you know, what you know, but then what you might need to research and actually writing?
Yeah, that is probably the hardest thing. I think that it's very easy because I'm by nature a really curious person. And it's very easy to just get stuck in that sort of research rabbit hole of, I'm going to read this 1,000-page book of folklore from, you know, the Western Isles. because I want to, and it's fun and it's interesting. But there, at some point I have to be like, no, I'm going to stop and actually, jot this down. But I'm very often, reading books and with a notepad, and making notes, not so much about the legends themselves within the books, but which ones I want to incorporate, and how they're going to get incorporated, and what what bearing they might have on the larger story and things like that. So yeah, I just always jotting things down and making notes. And sometimes I do have to just kind of be disciplined and be like, okay, I'm going to set that book aside, come back later, and focus on getting the story out. But it's also really inspiring, because sometimes I'll read something while researching, and it'll just kind of light that flame that in my imagination, and I have to go write. I'm like, this is so juicy, I just have to work it in right now. So it varies.
I'm glad that you shared that. So when that happens and you're going back and writing now, do you write, I'm going to say it this way, in order, meaning this chapter 1, then chapter 2, or do you write the scene saying, this scene is just speaking to me, this scene, because I just got inspired, it's juicy, it's what I want to include, I love this, and I'm not sure where it's going to go yet, so I'm just going to write it and then see what happens, and then pick up, like, do you write in order, or how does that work?
A little bit of both, actually.
Yeah.
Because I am a plotter and I kind of think of the stories in order like that, I do usually write in order, but there are often times when, and it's usually in the form of dialogue, that it comes to me and it's just so strong and so compelling. I'm like, I have to get this scene down. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know when, like, I've already written the climax for book 6. And I'm still working on book 5, because it came to me one day and I'm like, this is going to be a really amazing scene, and it's going to be electric, and I love it. And, I wrote out the dialogue, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to get this down and come back to it. So I have like a folder of, these are the scenes that I'm in storage, and I can trot them out when I get to that point. So yeah, I mean, so it's a bit of both, because I'll burn out that creative energy on that scene that's really got my attention, and then I'll come back and go back to where I was already in the plot, and get sort of back to the sequence that I was originally in. So I know I have that scene sitting out there, but I get back to where the focus is, and that stuff happens a lot. So I have a number of scenes just stored, waiting for me to get to that point. And it usually, of course, it always happens when you're in the shower or driving the car, or when you can't write things down. But yeah, phones are very helpful for that as well.
Yes, I will. When that's happened to me, I'll either email it to myself, or I'll use the voice app and I'll voice it all and then email that to myself. So yeah.
I have a hard time with the voice app, but if I stop, and I'll use like Jotterpad and email it to myself, or I've started writing in Dabble. I was a big Scrivener fan for a long time, but I've recently started using Dabble, and I like it a lot, because I can do it on my phone, I can do it on my iPad, I can do it on my computer, just wherever I am. If something comes to me, I can just put it in there and set it in its little bucket and keep it there for later.
But I like what you described about, so the idea hits, and rather than kind of go, but it's out of order, or
Right.
I'm not ready for this yet, you take advantage of it, you write it, and then you're willing to put it, I'm going to say aside, but you put it in a place that says, now I've got you situated where that scene section, or the development section of whatever, and then being able to pull it back out. I love that, because just as much as you could go through editing and say, this section, do I really need it, and move it out, and to hold on to it just in case, even if it never comes back in, the reverse is true too. And I love that you've described how you did that.
I do that with new projects too, because I'll often get an idea for a new project while I'm working on, something else. And I do the same thing. I'll like, this is really kind of in my brain. And if I don't exercise it now, I'm never going to get back on task with this book that I'm supposed to be working on. So I'll write a test scene, or I'll write a brief outline of a plot, or something like that, and sort of get whatever that creative thing is that's got my attention out. And then I can, move back to the new thing. So I have like a bucket full of story ideas and stuff that are just sitting out there.
So let me
Waiting.
ask, just waiting.
Yeah. I've had characters in the middle of all kinds of craziness, just waiting for me to come back and fix their issue.
That's awesome. I love that. That's so fantastic. So when you are working with a series, as you are coming through, you've got book one, it's out, book two, you might be writing, or what have you, wherever you are in that cycle, how do you balance between promoting or talking about the previous books and continuing to work on what you have coming up, so that there's a nice ebb and flow, and honoring all that's been created? Because sometimes, it's really cool to be excited about the new thing that's out, but it's also these other books are there too. So how do you manage that dance?
Well, so with a series, you're really kind of always promoting the first book, no matter what, and so I'm always looking to gather new readers and meet new readers and things like that. So I'm always trying to kind of get the word out there about the first book, so we can get folks kind of hooked on these characters, because that's really what keeps people reading. When you have a series that is as long as mine, for sure. And so you're always promoting that first book. Trying to find the balance between writing and promoting is always a challenge. And, I think every author will tell you that it takes a lot of time to promote a book. And of course it takes a lot of time to write a book. So I try to sort of block time. I'm not always successful, because we have families and lives and things outside of our imagination, but I try to block time. So I try to say, okay, this day, this week is the day I'm going to do promotional stuff. And then you use schedulers, so that I schedule all my social media posts, or I schedule interviews, or I schedule whatever. And then I have these days that I'm going to be writing, and I try to keep things out of those days, so that I have my imaginary friends have room to come talk to me. And I use a lot of writing sprints as well, and I got into that when my children were younger, because I figured it might be hard to do a whole day of writing, but I can carve out 25 minutes here and 25 minutes there. And so hopefully I got good at one time. I would say it's hard sometimes, but you try to get good at finding whatever creative triggers pull you into that imaginary world and out of the real world, and try to figure out what they are and how to do it quickly. So like I use playlists that have music that inspires me to write. And so I would set my timer, play the music on my playlist, and try to bang out as much as I could in 25 minutes. And I still try to do that. It's my schedule's not quite as predictable as it was when my kids took regular naps. And so there are always challenges, but trying to block that time and trying to be sensible about it is the best way I know.
I love that. I really do. I think it's realistic too, because I love the point that you're making with the writer sprint, or you could also look at it as like the Pomodoro technique, where you set a timer and you run it for like 25, 30 minutes and take a break, because you want the break. And then if you feel you can do it again, do it again. If you do it again, but it's not for another couple hours, okay. To me, it's still about showing up, but it's also, I like the way you've described how you ebbed and flowed with that. I think that that's really cool.
I mean, we always have kind of daily writing goals. And, these are, if I'm going to make my deadline, I need to write this many words a day. And of course my deadlines are all self-imposed, but, but I need to write this many words a day, and I'll have that there. And I'm always kind of counting, and if I can string together like 4 good sprints, then I can probably hit my word goal for that day. But I'm always kind of counting. And I'm also, after working in the corporate world for so long, I'm kind of a nut for metrics. So I'm also like recording like this sprint, I was 25 minutes long and I wrote this many words, and stuff like that. So I'm always kind of looking to be more efficient with it. I don't know that I always am, but I'm always trying.
Yeah, but I like that, because I mean, it's something that you can, it's just yet another way of saying, how else am I improving in my business? Because it is running a business, and you're just looking at other ways of gauging what feels right for you. So yeah.
It also helps that readers are kind of nudging me every once in a while and being like, hey, where's the next book? Where's the next book?
No pressure, huh?
And yeah, I mean, I love that they love these characters, and I love that they want, the next installment. So it helps kind of drive that, will to keep going, honestly, because it's, I mean, I want to finish this story. And I have all these other ideas that I was saying in a bucket off to the side that I want to get to. So, you just kind of, I don't know. I feel like I'm never writing fast enough, because I want to, I want to get that out. I want to get to these other stories, because I have, more ideas always.
I think that is awesome. Meredith, this has been so cool. Where can people connect with you? Where can they get your books?
Well, my books are available at most ebook sellers, and also in print. And if they're in Fredericksburg, in Virginia, you can get it at Agora Downtown Coffee Shop, which is a lovely coffee shop. They make an amazing curry mocha. It's my favorite.
Cool.
But and then they can always find me on at meredithstoddard.com, and M_R_Stoddard on Twitter, and MR Stoddard on Instagram.
Awesome. Meredith, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you.